guys, and welcome back to my channel. For today's video, we are going to be doing another organization video. This one is going to be all about the kitchen, which is the heart of the home. Also one of my favorite places to do. As you know, I already have tons of videos on kitchen organization, so you can check those videos out as well. But I'm going to try to be doing an overview, kind of explaining for each and every kitchen, kind of how to go about it. So yeah, let's just go ahead and jump right in. Okay guys, so I have my little notebook down here, so if I keep glancing down, that is why, and I apologize. But the first thing I want to talk about with kitchen organization is zones. Zones are very important for the kitchen, and everyone has them without maybe even knowing what those are. So zones are basically different areas of the kitchen that you like to do different things. So you have like your cooking zone, you have your prepping zone, your baking zone, things like that. Like I said, everyone has those zones, but they're very important to figure out exactly where each zone is before going in and organizing your kitchen. So what I want you to do, starting out, is kind of look at your space like it's a fresh, new space. Don't think of it as where everything is currently. Try to back up and look at everything like a blank slate. If it helps to draw it out on paper and write down, the different cabinets and different spaces and move things around, that's what I normally do. Then go ahead and do that. I know it's really difficult when it's your own kitchen. So actually being able to see it all, lay it all out, figure out those spaces, that works. That would probably work best for you. Now, like I said, prep zone is super important. So wherever you prep your food. So some people it's their island, some people it's right next to the stove. It kind of depends on where you currently prep your things. Where do you chop, and use your cutting boards and do all of those kind of things to prep for cooking? Where do you normally like to have all of your bakeware? Where do you like to do all of the baking stuff? Is it a different area of the kitchen? You kind of got to figure those places out before you could figure out the placement of where everything goes. Okay, so obviously going into the next category, it's going to be the placement of the items. So again, look at your space like it's a blank, spot. Don't look at it as you have it now, because it will just get really confusing and you can get kind of frustrated with it, not looking at it as completely empty in a completely brand new kitchen. So with that being said, again, just look at it with fresh eyes, and think about placement of plates, silverware, Tupperware, cutting boards, all of those different things. Obviously pots and pans, spices, cooking utensils. There's so many things in a kitchen that it's really important to figure it out. So kind of look at everything you have, write it all down on a piece of paper. So do broad categories, like I said, so do cutting boards, do baking sheets, you can do pots and pans, silverware, plates, bowls, things like that. Do kind of a broad category of everything you have, and it'll make it a lot easier to kind of play around on placement and where you're going to put everything in a kitchen. Okay, so like I said, whenever you draw it out, it's easier to write it out. Now, there are a few tips and tricks for everything that you have in a kitchen. So one of those things is pots and pans. Obviously, you want the pots and pans to be right next to the stove and oven, so that way they are super easy to access, because that is what you're going to be using most whenever you're cooking in a kitchen, and you want them to be right there, super accessible and easy to get to. So what I always do is the cabinet right next to a stove. Go ahead and put your pots and pans there. Now, again, there's one on each side, so it can switch up depending on your placement of your fridge and things like that. But keep in mind to have your pots and pans right next to the stove. Now, what I always also think about are cooking utensils and spices, because those are two other things that are going to be needed near the stove, and super easily accessible. So what I always do is a drawer on each side. So I do one drawer next to the stove that has all of the cooking utensils that will be organized in there, and then I have another drawer for all of the spices. Now, lots of people think they don't have enough drawer space for spices, and they put them in the upper cabinet. The upper cabinet does work sometimes, but it's going to be a lot more difficult. You won't be able to use as much space as you have in that area, if that makes sense. So to actually completely utilize all of your space in your kitchen, it is better to have them in a drawer, but again, that is my personal preference. If you have to have them in an upper cabinet, that's okay. There are other solutions for that, but it can be more difficult because of how small spices are, and you can do it a few different ways, but it still won't be using the depth of that upper cabinet space. So if you can, try to put them in a drawer next to the stove. Plus it's a lot easier to just be able to pull it open, see where everything is, and use them right there. So that is, again, just my personal preference on spices, but I do think both spices and cooking utensils are also important to have near the stove. Okay, the next thing I kind of look for is if you have any skinny cabinets or if you have a prep zone area, what I like to do is have all of the cutting boards and baking sheets and muffin tins, all of that in one space that is vertical, standing up. So that way it is using that small vertical tall space, and I feel like that is always best if you have one of those for those type of things. Now if it's way off on the end by itself, I don't think that is necessarily reasonable, just because with the cutting boards and things like that, you're going to use those quite often. So wherever you kind of have your prep zone, kind of keep that in mind, remember, and try to put those all in that one space. But having those all put together is going to help a lot, and also doing them vertically instead of stacked on top of each other horizontally will also help you tremendously. What I also like to do is I have one of those small cabinets for my prep zone, and I have a small drawer above it, and I have all of my knives in a knife block insert that is in my drawer. So what I like to do is obviously have your knives and those type of utensils near where all of your cutting boards and things like that are. So kind of keep that in mind, grouping those together, keeping those close. You can normally use the drawer right above that cabinet to put those together, if that makes sense. Okay, another big one I like to keep in mind is Tupperware. So some people don't use Tupperware, some people use it all the time. So it completely depends on you and your routine and how often you use it. Now, for me, I use Tupperware all the time. So in that case, what I'm going to do is kind of look at your triangle in your kitchen. So if you don't know the triangle, basically what it is every kitchen has a triangle with the sink or dishwasher situation, your stove, and then stove oven, and then your refrigerator. So kind of look at your triangle in there and figure out what the middle space is, if that makes sense. So what I do is normally put the Tupperware right in between my fridge and stove in the lower cabinets, because that way it is also right there next to my dishwasher, so it's kind of in between all of the places where it's going to go. It makes it super easily accessible, super easy to put away, grab when I need it. It's right next to the fridge, everything where I need it to go. So I feel like that is the perfect place for it. But again, if you don't use Tupperware very often, it's okay to kind of put it off on its own on the end, and be able to utilize that space for something else that you use frequently. So if that's just pots and pans for you, then that's the perfect spot for that, as long as it's next to the stove. Okay, so for the upper cabinets, there's a lot to think about as far as like cups and plates and all of those type things. What I normally like to do is try to put my cups right next to the fridge. So wherever the fridge is, the cabinet right next to it, I always like to put my cups there. Obviously that's where you're going to be using it the most, is to be able to grab a cup and use it in the fridge, or grab a drink, vice versa. You kind of want that to all be together. So always think about your cups being next to the fridge. As far as plates and bowls go, make sure they are near your silverware. So I like to kind of have that all in one space as well. So I kind of have my cups and then my plates and bowls kind of in the same cabinet, because it's a double cabinet, and then I have my silverware right there next to it, so it is also next to the fridge. But that way it's all together, and the silverware is pretty easily accessible for me to use in all three spaces in my triangle. So it's right next to the dishwasher, so I could just grab them and put them away right there, not having to walk around, take several steps that I don't need to. It's also right next to the oven and the fridge and the plates and everything, so it's kind of in the middle of everything because of how often it is used. So also kind of keep that in mind as well, for the plates, cups, silverware, all of that kind of stuff. Okay, so obviously there's going to be a few other miscellaneous type things that you're going to have in your pantry, or not pantry, your kitchen. But one thing about that is small appliances. So lots of times people have small appliances, or they will have teas or coffee or anything like that. That will all depend on if you're putting it in the pantry or if you're going to keep it in your kitchen. So I kind of think about those things last because those normally aren't used as much, and you can also create like a coffee or tea station in another part of the kitchen that's not going to be at the heart of the kitchen. So I like to kind of think of those last or kind of off to the side, if that makes sense, after thinking about all of the necessities in a kitchen. So obviously there is more to think about, and it'll all depend on the things and items that you have in your personal kitchen and the things that you use the most. Will depend on how close you want it to everything. And then of course the last thing that everyone has is a junk drawer. So I normally like to limit it to one junk drawer. There's no need for any more than one junk drawer in a kitchen. I've done several kitchens where there's been multiple junk drawers, and I was able to get it down to just one. It's really not that difficult. Normally you just need to go through it if it is overflowing, and kind of put things back in their normal places. I realize there's some that people put, you know, a bunch of pens and markers and things like that that can go in your office instead, or if you have anything from like a bathroom, you can put them in there. You just kind of have to disperse it back to where it needs to go to try to keep up your junk drawer. The other thing that is huge for junk drawers is also keeping it organized with dividers and things like that. So we'll go ahead and talk about drawers and how I normally organize inside of drawers. So of course for everything it's very different, but I like to always do dividers and inserts. So for silverware, I like to do an insert. For like my knives and stuff, I like to do a block insert. And then for my spices, I like to do an insert, and then I like to do the individual containers. And then for like a junk drawer, or for your cooking utensils, or anything else that you may have in the kitchen, if you do have the tea, coffee, things like that in a drawer, I like to use dividers. So they do have adjustable dividers that I absolutely love, and then there's some that actually have different lengths of like dividers between the dividers to kind of make your own insert on Amazon. I will link those down below for you guys. They are my absolute favorite. I love using those for all kinds of spaces in the kitchen because you can use them for anything. Now, with regular inserts like spices and silverware and things like that, make sure you are measuring your space. I know I say it every video, but that is something you have to remember. If it does not fit right in that space, you're going to be wasting space, and that is not what you want to do in a kitchen. Trust me. Kitchen has a lot of valuable space in it that you don't want to not use. So make sure you actually find an insert that fits that space correctly. So that way, again, you're not wasting any space. I also recommend for drawers getting museum wax. They are like, it's basically just like a super sticky wax type stuff that you put on the bottom of any inserts and things, so that way they're not sliding around if it doesn't fit front to back. So that would help a lot with that situation. If you need help with that ever, using museum wax, which you can get off of Amazon, you can get a lot of it for pretty cheap on there. So do recommend doing that if you have not done so already. But yeah, mainly for those drawers, you want to have an insert for almost all of them. Okay, so the last thing I want to kind of talk about is cabinets and how I normally use and organize those. So for pots and pans, I like to personally do it to where every pot and every pan has its own space in that cabinet. It has a specific dedicated shelf or something in there, so that way it is easy for people to get to them and to put them away. Pots and pans are one of the biggest things in kitchens that become a complete disaster and people get overly frustrated with. And so what I found is really don't stack them at all, just don't do it. And instead have a specific spot for each and every pot and pan. So for example, having the like dividers that go this way, and you can stand them up, and having all of your pans that way, and having them in their own slots will help you a lot. And then I also have little shelves that go inside of my cabinet to hold all of my pots, and I like to do them big size and then a little size on top, so they each have their own placement. I do not like to stack them at all because I find that is the worst in the kitchen, and so many people get frustrated with it. So if you can, please, please, please try to do that, and trust me, it will make the biggest difference in your kitchen. Okay, another thing is to-go cups. So a lot of people have to-go cups or a bunch of mugs or something like that in their kitchen besides their regular drinking glasses. What I recommend for that is if you are doing cups all the way in an upper part of the cabinet, don't just stack them in there like you normally do. What I recommend is actually getting the little cup holder things. They are also on Amazon, and I can link those down below for you guys. But it holds a cup individually, and you can stack multiples on top of each other, and you can fit even more cups up there, and you can actually see them and access all of them. So I highly, highly recommend, if you have too many cups, to do it that way, because again, you can see it all. It's accessible all the way up at the top of the cabinet, and I feel like that's always the best use of that space, just because it's so hard to get to and so hard to see what's always up there. Now, depending on how far you want to take your kitchen organization and how much you want to spend on it, there are also drawers that you can put in lower cabinets that I recommend for certain items. So for me personally, I love it for my Tupperware. I have my Tupperware in a drawer that pulls out in my lower cabinet, and then I have a divider in there to hold all of the lids on the side. If you have, let me kind of back up for a minute. If you have Tupperware that are all different kinds, all different sizes, what I recommend is keeping your lids on there. If they are all like the same, or you only have like a couple sizes of the same kind, then I think it's okay to put your lids to the side. However, if it's a bunch of different kinds and it's kind of mix match, keep your lids on there, because otherwise it will become a mess. So that was just a random tip for your Tupperware. But going back to kind of what I was talking about, the pull out drawers, they work really well for some of the lower cabinets. I don't like to do it for all of them. I like to have my pots and pans in their own space, so that way they each have their own section. But that is also an option to think about depending on your budget and how far you want to go with your kitchen organization. Alright, you guys, so that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys did, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. I would really, really appreciate it, and I will see you guys in the next organization video. Bye, guys!